First of all, the protests were legitimate, and the initial protesting was about the terrible state of the economy. And you had two groups of people on the street. You had people that want change in that regard and reform, and others who are more conservative. There was not a directed effort to overthrow the government. Now, what happened was that the Mossad, with the help of the CIA and MI6, then joined the fray, went in there and deliberately tried to provoke the government into acting very brutally towards the protesters, to the point where they were paying large numbers of people to essentially be violent. They were passing out weapons and urging them to shoot at the police. So it evolved over time because we were trying to exploit the legitimate protest to turn it into a regime change opportunity. The forces that were already assembled were supposed to be employed to exploit that opportunity. But it became very clear within a fairly short period of time, thanks to assistance and help from the Chinese and the Russians, that the 40,000 Starlight terminals that were smuggled into the country, which were used to orchestrate the regime change portion of the protests, were discovered and eliminated. And the response from the intelligence community was, it's failed. Our attempt to exploit this and turn it into something more has not worked. Mr. Netanyahu, I think, made that very clear to President Trump in private. So at that point, it made no sense to launch strikes. And the determination was then made, if we're going to do this, we're going to need a lot more firepower. And I think the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, made that very clear to President Trump, that we were going to have to assemble more forces with more missiles, more munitions for a longer campaign, that this would not be a 2 or 3 day operation. So we're still waiting. We've assembled many assets, but not all of them. I would expect to see at least 2 more carrier battle groups to show up. There may be 3 more coming. That would take another 10 days. And now that doesn't mean they couldn't launch with what they have, because you have to remember that the main striking power is not delivered by the Navy. It's delivered by the Air Force. And I think they're prepared for something analogous to the Kosovo air campaign in 1999, which involved everything short of nuclear weapons. And I think that's the guidance that's been given to the Air Force and the Navy. You can employ whatever you like as long as it does not include a nuclear weapon. And the Air Force has the bombing capability to do an enormous amount of damage. Now, some of that has to be done at a standoff distance of some kind at very high altitude. But as you succeed, assuming you succeed in degrading Iranian air and missile defenses, then it becomes easier to bring in B-52s and others and bomb directly overhead. I'm sure that they phased this thing, and I suspect that they're planning on a 10-day to 2-week air campaign. Now, that doesn't mean that the Navy side doesn't count, but remember, the Navy is always limited. They shoot some number of missiles that they have, that they have on hand, and then they have to replenish. You still have to feed everybody who's at sea. You still have to reload, which means you've got to go back to various installations where they can load missiles and other equipment. So the Navy is in a position where it can only do so much over a specific period of time, whereas the Air Force can sustain this for quite a while, from the United States, from Germany, from Europe in general, probably from bases in Italy and Sicily. So that could go on for some time. Now, today, the Iranian position, I think, is much stronger. I think particularly over the last 6 months, enormous effort has been invested in Iran by the Chinese in particular, but also the Russians. I think the Russians have weighed in to assist with the integrated air defenses, because the last time around, I'm sure you noticed this, the integrated air defenses didn't work very well.
Yeah.
And the Iranian president went to Moscow. If you listen very carefully, it was in the background. President Putin said to President Pashkinyan, "You should have let us help you." And as it turned out, the Iranians had turned away assistance from the Russians in many cases because they wanted to do the operation on their own. They wanted to defend themselves. And President Putin was very straightforward, said, "You should have let us help you earlier." Well, they've now allowed the Russians to help them. So I would expect those air and missile defenses to work infinitely better this time. The Chinese have provided, I'm told, at least 500 missiles. I don't know the mix. I'm sure somebody does, but I don't have access to that information. And the question is, how long range are these missiles? I mean, in the past, the Iranians could not reach Diego Garcia. Do they now have missiles capable of reaching Diego Garcia? I don't know. That would be a serious problem, because they have virtually all our other bases in the Middle East within range, but they still can't reach the bases that we might use in Europe and the United States. Now, President Trump obviously has an interest in whether or not Iran develops a nuclear weapon. That's entirely different. That's a very different thing, because the Iranians have said repeatedly, we're not going to do it. And it's against our law. Now you can sit there and say, well, we don't believe what you say. That's fine. But the Iranians have made it very clear they're not going to go down that road. Now, that could change after this air campaign is conducted, depending upon the damage to the state. Because remember, this campaign is very different from what we saw last June. Last June was kind of a demonstration. Everybody was on board for it. I'm going to do this. They said, if you're going to do that, we won't interfere. And then the Iranians responded, and we said we wouldn't interfere. President Trump was trying to sort of tie a bow on the operation and say the war is over, the nuclear facilities are destroyed, and we go forward from here. Well, that was never really true. But I genuinely believe, having talked to President Trump and seen him up close, he really wanted that to be the case. I contend he doesn't want to do this, but he has no choice. He's backed into a corner. Some of that is his own rhetoric, but I think a great deal has to do with the enormous pressure that Israel exerts over the United States government and the current administration. Israel and its agents are all over the government. And I think it's been made clear this will happen. If it doesn't happen, I don't know what they've threatened President Trump with, but whatever it is, I'm sure it's quite potent. And remember, he owes a great deal to these donors who are effectively agents for Israel, who've contributed enormous quantities of money to put him into the White House. They expect to be paid for their services. So I think this is going to happen. That's why I said earlier, I think the decision to strike is being made. The question now is, do we have enough on hand to make it work? Because they want to wage a ruthless air campaign of destruction that is designed to cause the disintegration of the Iranian nation. I think that's really what they're after. Now, they don't particularly care what happens to the regime in terms of the people in it. They want to kill them, that's for sure. But they want to make sure that Iran is rendered impotent, that it could conceivably break up into constituent parts. This, after all, was the goal in Ukraine against Russia. That's what Biden set out to do, and it has never changed. Whatever happened in Ukraine was designed to destroy Russia. Ukraine was just a convenient vehicle. That operation has obviously failed, and Russia is now stronger than it's ever been. Iran is not in the position Russia is. It's got 93 million, which is a little less than the 120 million the Russians or 140 million the Russians have. But I don't think they're as resilient. Let's put it that way. We'll see. They have a water problem. Their economy is in ruins. This could precipitate mass starvation. And everybody else in the region is watching this and says, well, this is going to cause an enormous refugee problem. We'll be overwhelmed with people from Iran because they won't have water, they won't have food, they won't have the medical support. This is particularly true for the Turks, who are right in the neighborhood. And the Turks have made it very clear they don't support this campaign because they don't want to deal with that. But also, whatever differences they have with Iran, they see no benefit to the destruction of the Iranian state in the region.